As you can see in your syllabus, this week we are off the rails a little bit. I thought we had dug into revising and editing a document as much as we needed to. We know those conversations. We're focusing on grammar, spelling, and punctuation each week to build that knowledge base. Let's talk about some real things that we may need to apply to a job search. And now, what I'm teaching you this week isn't necessarily textbook. A lot of it is anecdotal experience, meaning the positions that I've been in within an HR department, the positions that I've applied for. I want to share what I've learned because a lot of our parents haven't searched for a job in 20 years. And so sometimes the people that we go to for advice the most haven't been in the business for a bit. So let's talk about some things that I've learned. I want to pass them on to you. Some of them are pretty serious, but I think they're helpful when looking for a job to know for a fact what these companies are looking for. So today we're going to look at preparing for the job search, the interview, anecdotal tips, and the aftermath. And I know at this point you're like, oh my gosh, okay, looking for a job, preparing for an interview. I'm going to tell you some real tips, something that you can apply, something you're not going to be able to Google in a blog immediately. Let's talk about some anecdotal evidence that I've received. But first, the formation of our job as we know it now. So Mesopotamia, 10,000 years ago, was the first integration of agriculture. And agriculture and infrastructure is the only reason that we stopped being nomadic as a group, as a species. We stopped chasing herds. We stopped going from place to place depending on the inclement weather of the seasons. We built roots and we created communities. And the three reasons that we did that, primarily, is so that we could feed our less fortunate hunters, right? We could feed them all together, feed our hungry. We could heal our injured and our sick members of our communities. And we could provide, there was one more, I promise. We could heal, and we could rest our elderly, our weary. I'm not that old yet, so it's not something that pops into my mind. But, so we could feed our hungry, we could rest our weary, and we could heal our sick and injured. There is a anthropologist by the name of Margaret Mead, and she was asked one time what she saw was the sign of civilization, and they were expecting her to say a bed, or a fire tool, pottery, and she said no, a healed, broken femur bone. Because in the animal kingdom, when you have a broken leg, you don't survive. You're left behind, you go hungry, you do not have room to heal your body. You cannot rest if it's due to an old age injury and your just bones are brittle, and you go hungry because you cannot feed yourself. Your pack often was not going to wait for an injured wolf. So when we found a healed femur bone, she knew that meant community. That meant we have created a safe space for the members of our community to provide real civilization to a group. Fast forward, this is Henry Ford. I have no relation. I have no Henry Ford money. I have no Harrison Ford money. Do I wish I did? Absolutely. But the legacy that he leaves behind is a bit interesting. Right before he created the automobile industry, we were looking at factories, 10, 12-hour days, maybe 3 days a week, at whatever people could get in. And he decided that his line of production needed more stability. But he also decided to give people a little time off. He created the 8 to 5 work day. For your Dolly Parton fan, this might be a 9 to 5 work day. And he created this through his words, not for a high measure of productivity, but so that people had time off and the ability to consume items. So the 8 to 5 was not created for productivity. It was created for consumption, specifically of automobiles. You would have just enough time after your work day to go spend money on things. And if you had just a small amount of time free for yourself, you may pay a little bit more to get the satisfaction of a rest day in that small period of time. On October 24th, 1940, 8-hour workdays and 40-hour weeks finally became a standard practice in various industries across the world, but it was created by Henry Ford. That leads us to a job search. Ways to find a job. We've talked about this a little bit, but primarily pre-COVID and post-COVID, networking events, meeting people at job fairs is probably one of the best way to get your feet in the door, or to know someone. I know a guy is a really great way to get a job, or contact the company. And this is if you find those job postings on Indeed, etc. But if you have a dream company in mind and they don't have a job posting or opening, don't be afraid to email them your resume and say, hey, I love your company. I would love to work for you. Here's my resume. Let me know if anything becomes available. And that puts your name in the pot for future jobs. So preparing for our interview, this is really serious. Read the posting. What are they looking for, and what are the words that they're using in that job posting? Use those words in your resume. If they're saying, we're looking for someone to maintain blank, we're looking for someone to innovate blank, use those action verbs in your resume to explain other experiences that you've had, and you're already halfway there. Expect a wait time after you do apply for these jobs. Anything that happens in the company, someone gets fired, someone gets sick, it will come before hiring. It's a little bit ironic because sometimes those positions could really help them out in times of need. Some jobs will not answer back at all when you apply to them. I don't understand this. There should be a system that lets you know, hey, you haven't been considered, thank you for applying, but oftentimes there's not. So turn your email notifications on loud, or if you get 1,000 emails a day, create a new email account specifically for business and professional purposes, and turn your email notifications on loud, because you don't want to miss one day this job that you've been looking at forever contacting you, and you don't reply till Monday. You may have missed your window of opportunity for that position. There is training needed at every job. You're never going to walk in the first day and know exactly what's going on. Sometimes, I would say the majority of the time, it will take you a year to be really good at your job. You can be pretty decent at first, but it's going to take you a year to figure out the networking involved in the company, who you go to when specific things go wrong, creating a relationship with those people so you know you can trust them to go to when something goes wrong. And then, I don't know if you've ever been in a position where you had a peer worker and they were fantastic at their job and they moved up to manager and they weren't that great at being manager. That's not always the fault of the company. Sometimes that's a lack of company training in moving these people up and not providing any additional training to make them succeed at their job. Let me move this over. Okay. Get an idea of money. Why else do we get a job? Research the average salary in your field and location. An Uber driver salary is not going to be the same in Fort Worth as it is in San Francisco. So it's important to not only look at the average of salary in your industry, but also in the area that you're wanting to go into. Look up the cost of living in that area, specifically if you're moving somewhere else or intending to move somewhere else, and then set a good budget, something that you would be comfortable living at. Not bare minimum, comfortable living at, a little bit of blank space, and then create 2 numbers in your head. One is your comfortable living number, and the second one is a little bit above that, maybe 5,000, maybe 10,000. That's kind of where my anecdotal experience stops. I don't know how big the gap should be, but never be the first one in a job interview to state a number. So if they come to you and say, hey, what number were you thinking about for this position? Your answer is, what do you feel like would be fair for a position like this? You keep those numbers under the belt. Make them state a number first. Whatever they offer, if it doesn't meet your comfortable standard of living, that's what you ask for. If it's above your comfortable standard of living, then you ask for that second number that's a little bit above. Keep the upper hand in these situations. We'll move myself back over here. So, qualifications on job openings and postings are often created years in advance by someone else. They may be created by interns. They're vague recommendations, is what I like to say. Now, that being said, if there's an engineering position and I've never opened CAD, maybe that's not something that I apply for. But there's a communications position open that has 2 to 3 years of experience and you have one, apply for that job. Qualifications are recommendations most of the time. Okay, let's talk about the amount of time you spend in your day. So, routine on average in the mornings takes people 30 minutes to an hour. So we're going to round these out. If there's ever between two numbers, we'll go right down the middle. Those commutes, and we talked about what we would love our commute to be, but average across the nation, regardless of city, is about 30 minutes one way. Whether you're taking the subway in New York or you're taking I-20 from Fort Worth to Dallas. So work is 8 to 5, 9 to 5, Dolly Parton, including lunch. Cooking on average daily and cleaning the food has about a 37-minute. We'll pop up numbers in a moment. There's an average time that the human eats each day. I added in an hour of recreation because I think it's important to fit in something you love to do. Workout, TV, playing with your dog at the dog park, etc. Sleep, if you are between the ages of 18 and 25, then 7 to 9 hours is good. Like I said, we're going right down the middle at 8 hours. And if you are in school, everyone's heard the trope, for every hour that you spend in class, you should spend 3 hours outside of class, which is a lot of time. So let's take that trope and apply it. Let's say you're doing class in the afternoons, or maybe a portion of your work is going to in-person class, and this schoolwork is the 3 hours outside of class that you are expecting. I know I'm blocking a little bit of this, so we will pop me over here. So 45 minutes routine, 60-minute commute because we're going both ways. Work is 480 minutes, cooking 37 minutes on average. The average person eats for 68 minutes a day. Recreation, I provided an hour, 480 minutes to sleep, and 308 minutes a day, roughly, of that 2160 divided by 7. So, that means it's 25.6 hours a day, which is too many, right? So there's a lot of the time in our day that we spend at work, 8 hours of it. 90,000 hours of our life is spent at work, which is equal to over 10 years of our life. Over 10 years of our life at a job. So how will we be spending it? And do we enjoy what we're doing? Are we going to dread 10 years of our life? And that's full 24 hours a day. So let's break down Fort Worth, because I think it's important to know real world experiences. And I don't understand job postings that don't include monetary salary expectations. I think it wastes everybody's time. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice by not talking about our salaries. It's a hot take. That's a very hot take. People don't like to talk about money. I do. I'm open with it. I'm very transparent with my budget because I want others that are about to be in the workforce to know what to expect. So let's talk about Fort Worth. Median house cost is $261,000. Would I buy a $261,000 house? Probably not. But again, we're talking about averages, and when you're looking up locations, this is the type of things that are going to pop up. The average household income is $58,448. I'm single. This is my only salary, and so my full-time job offer at the Fort Worth Zoo was $34,000. The salary to afford that $261,000 house is $55,000. And so when they came at me with 34, I had that number in my head, right? And I said, well, I have a master's degree, and this is my work experience. This is the number that I was looking for, which was about 50. And they came back with 35. So there's sometimes there will be jobs that do not have wiggle room. Do we love it? No. But nonprofits specifically may have some barriers to salary negotiation, and that's just part of the game. You have to figure out at that point in time, I took the job because I wanted to come back to Texas, but looking at this long term, it wasn't sustainable for me. So would I take a job this low in the future? No. And that's just something you have to decide in the moment of what you're comfortable with and what is sustainable long term, especially if you're looking for a long-term career. We've all looked at a SWOT analysis before. But before you go into an interview room, we're going to look at a SWOT analysis of the company. So check online and see what the company really does well at. And then check a weakness that you find. This one is going to be under the belt, like we talked about. You're going to keep this silent, but you're going to build on this knowledge to discover an opportunity. Bring something to the table at a job interview. Now, if we're working at a local restaurant, maybe this isn't the path that we take, right? We're not going to look at a weakness of Arby's in Lubbock and bring an opportunity to the table. This, I think, is more when you're looking for long-term careers with your degree. This is what we look at. The company may see through your opportunity and realize the threat within the weakness. That's the goal. The goal is for you to not have to state the weakness, but for them to see the threat from the weakness and recognize the opportunity you bring to the table. So, for example, if you were applying for a social media position at a company, you might see a lot of the strengths that the company does. Maybe they have really good content and quality, but a weakness in comparison to other organizations of their size, they have half the amount of followers on Twitter and Instagram. So an opportunity you might walk in with is an engagement plan of within the first year, I'd like to grow your engagement and your followers by at least 20%. I don't know, come up with a number. And this is how I'm going to do it. And those are the types of things that win interviews. There are 3 things that you should bring into every interview room. I do not care what else you forget. Your left shoe doesn't matter. Bring these 3 things. 1 is some printed resumes. You will have people that run into your interview last minute that did not have the opportunity to print off your resume. It's so nice to have one to put in front of them. They may all have one, and you don't have to hand them out at all, but make them aware that they're available if needed. You need to come in with questions. We'll talk about some possible questions in a moment. And come in with a notepad and a pen. This may seem trivial, but if you come in ready to take notes and engage in the conversation, bringing home information later for you to reflect on, I don't know what it is about human nature that perceives this as very prepared and ready, but that's what human nature determines. And so these 3 things will give you a leg up in any interview. What kind of things would we put on our notes? Any details, but primarily we're going to write down the names of those people introducing themselves in that interview room as they tell them to us. You're going to write down their name and their job title. And we'll talk about why in a moment. Okay, let's talk about some questions that you could look at in a job interview room. This first one is a double-edged sword. This is for your benefit. What was something the person last in my role did really well? This is what you're gauging company quality, the culture, and the type of management that you will have. Because let's say this is the answer. Well, this is management. The person last in your role was so great. They came 30 minutes early every day. They stayed after. They worked on weekends when they didn't have to. I mean, they were just really productive. That tells you, in order to meet those standards and expectations, you're going to have to work outside of hours. That's not always realistic or fair. So, keep those in mind when you're looking at management. What's another example? Let's see. The person last in your role did above and beyond. They would help on every single project, even from other departments. They were at every company luncheon. Again, these standards and qualifications, if you're not prepared to meet those, will you be perceived as successful in your job? So you need to know what standards they were holding the last person to, so you can know if it's even viable for you to step in and really enjoy it. How will I be trained? Who will train me? What does the first week of training look like for a position like this? Is there room for growth and professional development in programs that you would like to utilize? Let's say you're pretty good with Adobe in general, but maybe they want to start in video and you would really like to go into an Adobe Premiere training program. Those are some things to consider. Building yourself as a worker helps their business, so that should be something that's definitely on the table. I may cover up a little bit of this, but I'll read it. What are the most important things you'd like to see someone accomplish in the first 30 or 60 or 90 days on the job? You can probably minimize this of, what would you like to see done in the first 30 days of this position? What would you like me to accomplish? You can insert yourself in that. And that way, the first day on the job, in the next month, this is what they'd like to see. And you're not running blind into your position. Okay. This is important. Go buy a box of thank you notes before you go to your interview, and like a nicer felt tip pen. Cost you $6 and all. Take your notes with you in the car. Get the names of those people on a notepad in your interview. If you're not sure how to spell them, you can look them up on Facebook or the company website, right, to make sure your spelling is correct. Sit in your car after. Come directly out of the interview, sit in your car and write these. Write very specific notes from those details that you wrote down about each person's position. If they shared an anecdotal story with you, include that. Then immediately walk and take the notes back in to the secretary. The end. Do not post, don't go postage, give them immediately back to the secretary and say, hey, would you distribute these as soon as they're done? It is huge, huge. And if possible, if there's like 50 other people waiting in the interview, kind of do it low key, right? Another thing to remember, and Miss McKenzie shared the story with me today of one time she was in an interview and they had the secretary watch the room of the candidates and see some red flags that they considered. So I know I get nervous. When I get nervous, I scroll on my phone, but that was a red flag to them. If someone was just scrolling on their phone instead of visiting with the other people in there, if they were friendly to the secretary, oftentimes the person running the front desk, regardless of their title, is the glue that holds the company together. Be very nice to them. And if you have a good conversation with them, go ahead and write them a thank you note too. Say, thank you for making me feel so warm and welcome before my interview. I really appreciated the hospitality that you provided. It put me at ease before, the conversation, and I'm very grateful. Write them a thank you note too. If they've been conversing with you through email, do the same with an email, in addition to, not in replacement of. If they were contacting you, telling you where to go for your parking or whatever, go ahead while you're in the car and you're writing your interviews, send them an email and say, thank you so much for the opportunity to have this conversation today. I'm thankful of the time that you took, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So we're going to look at an infographic. Infographics will become a thing later on. I know you've seen them if you've ever had a social media, but we will create one later on, and this is a good layout. So maybe glance over this and keep these things in mind in terms of percentages and graphs and icons, but survey finds it's worth asking for a higher salary in those negotiations. Those two numbers you keep under your belt. 62% of new grads are not negotiating. They're not. They're just taking the first number that they take. But 90% of employers have never retracted an offer because an entry-level, us, candidate tried to negotiate. 90%. Now, we have those 10% that might. But if they're not willing to negotiate your livelihood, maybe it's not a great spot for you long-term anyway. 34% of women negotiate, 44% of men negotiate. That's probably a whole nother conversation, but just a statistic to know. 74% of employers have room to increase their first offer by 5 to 10% during negotiations. The zoo fell in that 26%, right? But 74% have room to improve that first number. 80% of students and grads who negotiate are at least partially successful. So maybe they're not hitting that full, $5,000 more than you were comfortable with, but even a $2,000 to $3,000 raise is a huge deal, especially when you're first starting off. And then there's some non-salary benefits. There's schedule, which I don't think is quite as important as money at the end of the day, honestly. There's paid time off, bonus, and then stock for those larger companies. But negotiation is worth it. This week you have your read, watch, do folders. Your resume is due Saturday at midnight. Double check it with the rubric just to make sure that you're saving yourself some heartache and you're saving us some headache grading, because we want you to do well on these. And then there's that extra credit strengths quest that could help you get started on some action verbs. So I hope this has helped this week. Know that we are a resource anytime you have additional questions about your job. This class is meant to prepare you for the workforce. So even if it's not in our lesson, send me an email if you ever have a question and let me know. And if I don't have the answer, I will find at least the closest anecdotal experience that I have to share with you. So see you next week.